Welcome back to Upside Down Data. We need to talk about Avalanche. AVAX is the native token of the Avalanche blockchain, and following the election, it enjoyed a pretty nice rally, rallying as high as about 140%. Now, that's not as high as some other assets rallied, but it is respectable at the very least. And in fact, if you compare it to some other assets that are thought of highly in the crypto space, such as Solana, for example, it actually rallied further than Solana after that event. So the reason I bring up Solana here is that Avalanche and Solana have tended to move together at different points in the market cycle, especially in the prior bull market. Solana would often go on a run first, and then Avalanche would follow, and then Solana would be correcting, then Avalanche would follow and correct with Solana also. They tended to move somewhat with a lag to each other. Solana would kind of set the direction, and Avalanche would follow. Now, interestingly, when you compare their performance directly against each other, so this is the price of Avalanche divided by the price of Solana. So this is going up, it means that Avalanche is outperforming Solana. Going down, it means that Avalanche is underperforming Solana. You can see that overall, Avalanche has been losing ground to Solana basically its entire time. There was this period of relative outperformance, but really then it's been down only ever since, with these brief periods of uptrends. So when you look at this, there's a few questions that come to mind. First off, you might ask, why would you ever buy Avalanche and not just buy Solana? If Solana is constantly outperforming Avalanche, shouldn't you just ignore it and only buy Solana? And that's totally possible. That's one interpretation. That's the way that people often like to look at these relative valuation charts. And if they see something like this, they might just say, well, why would I ever hold that, the one, in this case, Avalanche instead of Solana? But there are periods, as we talked about, where there can be outperformance of Avalanche against Solana. And so really the question would be, are you at a moment where that might happen, where it might make sense to be buying into Avalanche and then ride it up versus buying into Solana? So that's what I want to talk a little bit more about right now. What our models are seeing with Avalanche, and might we be at a period where Avalanche could do well and maybe make it worthwhile to be buying instead of something like Solana, which has been losing ground to for basically its entire life with only brief periods of outperformance. So let's go ahead and get into that. But first, if you're interested in seeing live data from our models and more, you can go over to our website, polaritydigital.io. And if you sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro plan, you get live access to our data for models for Avalanche, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a bunch of different altcoins. If you're interested, check it out, link in the description. Okay, so the first model I want to talk about here is our short-term upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So this is a risk model that we have here at the channel. High values mean high risk, low values mean low risk. And it cares about moves that play over days to weeks, so shorter in its time horizon. And you can see that when it's at these low levels, those have been historically great times to be acquiring AVAX. And then when it gets to these high levels, those have been good times to be distributing Avalanche. Now, based on what we're just talking about, one of the things we might think about is AVAX setting up for at least a short-term rally? Might it be getting into a phase of the market cycle where not only can it rally against the USD, but maybe even put in one of these moves against other assets like Solana that act as alternatives that one might be looking at instead of Avalanche? Now, when we look at short-term risk, the good news here is that we've actually reset all the way back down to the same level that we're at right before Election Day here in early November. Now, that rally was pretty substantial, about 145% move to the upside. We've now cooled off back to the same level. A similar type of rally would not be surprising off of these risk levels. Avalanche has plenty of room to work with to the upside if it wants to. And so that's where I think that if the broader market gets bullish again, if we see, for example, Bitcoin break out to new all-time highs, it would not surprise me at all to see an asset like AVAX in this kind of setup that it has be able to perform quite nicely. Now, of course, the question is, when will we see that kick off? So I talked just a bit ago about how we might wait for something like Bitcoin to do something or some other external catalyst. We can also just look at the data itself to see when might be we getting some strength into the market. So this is our trend confidence indicator, or TCI. So this model cares about trend, as the name implies. And really what you want to do with this model is look at how it's moving relative to price. So when you see it move up aggressively, oftentimes then price will follow. So if you're kind of in a downtrend where you see the TCI start really shooting up, that can be a sign of strength re-entering the market, and price will often follow. Vice versa, if you see the TCI start moving down aggressively, that suggests weakness, and correction or consolidation often follows. So you kind of follow those waves and see how oftentimes you'll see the strength really manifests itself pretty strongly in the TCI, and then price catches up, vice versa. Now we're seeing right now is that we had that rally after of election day, but then we started really coming down aggressively through here. Now the good news is that it seems like we might be starting to form a bottom on the TCI and start to move back up. And if we see that continue and this really move up aggressively, that in conjunction with having risk be so low could be a bullish sign that a notable reversal to the upside could be coming. And especially if that coincides with something like Bitcoin breaking to new all-time highs or other external catalysts that are bullish for the crypto space, those are the kind of things I think could really catapult us up there. And it's really that kind of setup that you might be looking for to think, is it possible that Avalanche could potentially outperform an asset like Solana? Maybe. Now, in that sort of situation, it's also likely that Solana could rally as well. So the question would be which would outperform the other. But certainly, just looking at Avalanche on its own against the dollar, we're in a pretty good setup here. And it is certainly precedent that in prior cycles, you will have those periods of outperformance of Avalanche over Solana. So time will tell. It also could be the case that we'd see something like last cycle, where Solana will actually be the one that'll move first, whatever the bullish catalyst is that kicks off the next kind of alt run in the crypto space, and then Avalanche follows after it. And if that happens, if you see Solana really starting to get to higher risk levels, but Avalanche's risk is way lower, is lagging behind, that can just be one more signal that maybe now is time to rotate into Avalanche and realize one of these periods where you see notable outperformance of Avalanche against something like Solana. So it could play out in a bunch of different ways like that, but those are some of the things that I'm going to be looking for. How is risk behaving? Is it staying relatively low? Are we seeing bullish signs on the TCI? Then what's going on in the broader market? If you're seeing Solana ripping to the upside, Avalanche lagging behind, then historically speaking, that's oftentimes a great opportunity, especially if you're seeing risk still being very low. And that's where you can kind of hop in to play catch up. And that's one of those times where, for example, with Solana, as I was just talking about, it moved up aggressively after the election, but in fact, buying into Avalanche was actually the better play as it started moving up along with Solana. So time will, of course, tell. And one of the things with Avalanche is that unless something really fundamentally changes in the market that can shift this macro downtrend against Solana and shift it into an uptrend, you might be looking more at a situation of hopping in for the short term rather than the long term. Really, it seems like so far, the better bet long term has been Solana. But certainly there are those periods of relative outperformance. And that's where in a bull market, you can capitalize. And especially if you ride something like Solana up first and you rotate into Avalanche and ride it up second, you've now compounded your profits by a pretty massive margin instead of just sitting in only one. And so that's the opportunity that bull markets present themselves. You can afford to be shorter term in your time horizon because things are volatile and you can play that volatility to your advantage, especially if you have the benefit of things like risk models to give you a sense of when distributing is probably a good idea and when accumulating is probably a good idea. So obviously not financial advice. You should make of this as you will and navigate the markets as you see best fit. But that's when I'm looking at Avalanche right now. So if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. I'll have updates for our models and more over there. And go to our website, partydigital.io, to see live data for our models and more.